Welcome to the third tutorial for the Eternal Lands map editor. This time we'll take a look at 3D objects and some basic height tiling. But first, let's see how the 2D grass tiling worked around the brick area from the last tutorial. You can see my results here using various grass 2D objects and slight adjustments to ensure no flickering occurs. You get a better view of how it's done turning off the ground tiles. As you can see, the majority is grass edges, 3 different ones randomly used to avoid patterning. As well, some random grass spots were placed 1 pixel higher than the edges to add to the randomness. They were also used in the corners to cover up where edges couldn't be placed together without adjusting their height. As was said last time, better to single pixel up spots instead of edges, as the straight lines of the edges become more visible when moved up. In the corner to the right, you could see that the last edge piece went out into the next grass tile. This is okay, as you can see, it blends in and it won't be noticeable to the player. Not moving an edge piece up is a best practice, but it is possible to ignore best practices if it can be done in a way that's not noticeable to the player from any normal angle. Here I decided it was best to move an edge piece up 1 pixel. I had a large area to cover that wasn't large enough for small spots, but too large for an edge piece. Trying to cover it with grass spots would have meant multiple spots at multiple 1 pixel up heights, which can be both messy and, if not done perfectly, noticeable by players. Using an edge piece moved up 1 pixel, despite being normally a bad idea, was deemed the better solution. However, it's not just moved up 1 pixel, but placed so that it's farther over the grass ground tile than the others. This helps prevent the straight sides of the edge from being noticeable. Now let's move into the topics of this tutorial. Height tiles are an incredibly important part of the map, as they determine both where a player can walk, as well as how high their character will be on that tile. When starting a new map, the entire map will be covered with green tiles, which indicates the base height level, that is the height of the non-liquid ground tiles. You may notice there's no green over the water. That's because the editor will delete any height tiles where you place a liquid ground tile, such as water or lava. It's important to remember this, as it can lead to accidentally deleting tiles you want to keep. It's important to keep your height tiles in check each time you're done placing 3D objects or ground tiles for what you're doing. Adjusting your height tiles as you add or change things to the map will help ensure you don't overlook any of them later. For example, I want to place a little island type area here in the water. For now, I'll just put the ground tiles for it. After putting the ground tiles, I immediately fill in the newly tiled area with ground level green height tiles so it can be walked on. We'll get back to height tiling more later, but now is a good time to start looking at the things that have the most effect on height tiling, and that is 3D objects. These will determine places a player cannot walk, such as a building or rocks or trees, or there may be objects that can be walked up or on, such as stairs, mountains, and ground mounds that are slightly a bit higher than normal ground level, and so on. There's 2 ways to select a 3D object. The first is the same as a 2D object with a list of files. This is even worse than for 2D objects, as there are many more 3D objects to choose from. The editor has a better option for 3D objects. Press Ctrl and B while in 3D object mode, and you'll get a panel listing the available 3D objects, uncategorized. We'll start by looking in the top category, trees and plants, and its top subcategory, trees with leaves. I've selected the first tree shown. As you can see, the base of this and many of the available trees is exactly 1 height tile in diameter. When placing 3D objects, always consider how the player will walk around or on said object and place it using the grid. In the case of an object like this that only takes up 1 height tile, make sure it's directly on a single tile. This will allow players to easily click on the ground while walking around it instead of ending up with a lot of unclickable area. Most of your larger trees will take up 4 height tiles. Place those within the grid accordingly. This placement is necessary only in areas where the object will be able to be walked next to or on top of. If you look at the very north edge of the Emerald Valley map, for example, you'll see the edge of it is a flood of random trees, but because the player can't walk into that tree area, it doesn't matter for most of the trees if they're aligned with the grid or not. Let's place something that a player can actually walk on. Crates are small and flat, and as such are easily walked on by players if they're placed correctly. Crates are exactly one height tile in width, so place them appropriately along the grid. You don't have to be exact about it, but be as close as possible to the grid. Let's get back to the height tiles now. As I said before, adjust your height tiles as you work for best results. First, let's delete the height tiles underneath the two trees. Use the black tile to do this. Select it from the new height tile panel, then click the grid under the trees, 1 under the small one and 4 under the large. Now the player cannot walk into the tree, which is a very good thing. Next, we'll make it so the player can step on the crate rather than walk into it. Instead of using the new tile panel, I've used the copy tool to copy a green ground tile, and I use insert to move the tile up. If you're not seeing this, just a color change, remember to press the tab button to change how the ground tiles are shown. Crates are slightly larger than they should be for this purpose, so let's move the crate down into the ground slightly, about 3 pixels, by using Ctrl and Shift while pressing Delete to move it downward. And of course, remember to save your map frequently. A player can only step up or down 2 height tiles. Any more and you'll prevent the player from walking into the object. A crate is exactly 2 height tiles up, making it a perfect example here. One height tile can be seen as halfway up the crate, while one more height upward is level with the top of the crate. Let's look at a similar object that can't be stepped on, a barrel. Unlike the crate, the barrel is 3 height tiles above the ground, so it cannot be directly stepped on by a player. You could, however, make it so the player can stand on it by placing it directly next to the crate. The player could step up 2 heights onto the crate, and from there only 1 more height up onto the barrel. Also note with the crate here, the height tile is a pixel or 2 below the top of the crate. A small amount like that is fine and won't be noticeable. Because height tiling is very specific, whereas 3D objects can be any height, you have to use best judgment placing height tiles. You may not even be able to see them with the 3D objects turned on. Now let's try placing something large and useful next to our garden here, a house. I specifically selected this third human house because it has stairs. Remember to place your objects based on how they'll be walked on or around. This house has 2 steps, which are 1 height tile in depth, but can have 2 height tiles across each. They also have handrails that should have their own ground tiles that can be set to be unwalkable. I'm also wanting to place a little space behind the house so it's not directly on the edge of the map. And this looks good. Not all objects will be easily placeable within a grid area, but do what you can to ensure walking around the object or on it is as it would be expected of the player. Now we'll handle height tiles to see just what the player will be able to do with this house. First, we need to ensure the player cannot walk directly into the 3D house object, but around it instead. Do this again by selecting the black tile or clone a non-walkable tile if one is nearby. I've started with removing the height tiles under the stair handrails, and now I'll go around the entire edge of the house. This is not going to be precise. Err on the side of caution. It's better to have some space around the object like this than to be walking halfway into the object. You can always use decorative objects like flowers or barrels or such to fill in the unwalkable space around the sides. And we're back around to the front, but we're not quite done. The house can still be walked into via the stair area. Even if that weren't possible, you do not want height tiles underneath objects. They can still be accessed using a teleport to range spell, or even worse, a teleport nexus from harvesting nearby can make you land on those tiles and get stuck. Hide your 3D objects at this point, and delete the height tiles underneath to prevent this. This object can be walked on, so we'll handle that next. The stairs are exactly 1 height up each. Move your grid up by pressing the plus button until it's over the top step at the door. Copy a ground level tile, press insert once to be 1 height up and mark the bottom step. Press insert again and mark the 2 tiles making up the top step. You can't see the height tiling for these directly, but they're there. You should confirm this by hiding your 3D objects. I won't do this just now, But as I said, you can select some decor to place around the house that will help cover up some of the excess unwalkable tiles around the house. When doing this, consider what the nearby external objects say about the house, and as well who lives in this area or the specific house, for example. Would they have flowers outside? Maybe a light hanging from the house next to the entrance. They have a garden, so perhaps some gardening tools would be nearby, like a shovel. There is a lot to select from, and in some cases you may even use objects for ways that they weren't intended. But remember, it should make some kind of sense in the end result. Some objects, such as barrels and crates, are generic enough that you can use them most anywhere and it won't be questioned by players why they're there. Let's look at placing some barrels and as well the ways you can rotate objects. Holding Control while using the left and right arrows will rotate the objects in the most common way, around the Z-axis. Holding Shift as well while doing this will allow you to rotate an object more precisely. Like height tiles, pressing Insert and Delete will move the object up and down. Holding Shift while doing this, so we'll do this on a pixel level like we did with 2D objects. To rotate along the X-axis, use Control with the up and down arrows. And to rotate along the Y-axis, use Control with the page up and page down buttons. Adding Shift to the mix always allows more precise rotations. But what about adding multiple objects rotated in random ways? For that, there's a rotation panel you can pull up by pressing Ctrl and W. The most common use of this, and in fact the only way I've personally used it, is to randomize the Z-axis rotation. I've selected random rotation and Z-axis. While holding down the Control button, I can place multiple barrels, all getting randomly rotated along the Z-axis. You can see this by the direction of the wood paneling on the top of the barrels. If this were all rotated the same way, it would be very noticeable. Remember to unmark the rotation choices in the panel before you close it, as they will continue to function even with the panel closed. Now we're going to place the barrels in such a way that they're not going into other barrels or the house, and that they cover the height tiles in a way that we can do walking around them as natural as possible. A lot of times working on maps is spent doing this, making adjustments and tweaks to each object to get it placed as best and more precisely as possible, and still looking okay. This looks fine for what we're doing here, so let's get rid of the height tiling beneath it and finish it off. And there it goes, saving the map again, like a good map editor should. This house could, of course, use more decoration, but let's look at something else now. We have some garden tiles set over on the edge of the map, so let's get some things growing on it. First, I'm going to remove some of the tiles, as we don't need something so large for an example. So I'll turn some of these back into grass tiles. And there. Now we can start planting stuff. Go back into the 3D objects to plants and trees, and toward the bottom there's a subcategory of vegetables. We'll start with carrots. We're going to do a row of them. Remember that plants don't grow uniformly, so like the barrels, we're going to use a random rotation on the Z-axis. Press Ctrl and W to set those options. The carrot is initially sideways, so we'll use Ctrl along with the up and down keys to rotate the carrot so it's green and is straight up. Now we'll place a row of carrots using the Control button with the random rotation turned on. Don't worry if something goes too far off while doing this, adjust that after you're finished placing the carrots. Turn off the random rotation, and you can now tweak each of the carrots to be more the way you want them to be. Getting a side view, you can see the random rotation made the green sprouts at the top look different on each carrot. Having them in a straight line isn't realistic either, so I'll move a few of them to be a bit off center. And to show you why the random rotation is a good thing here, let's compare it to a row of carrots that are all at the same rotation. That looks much more artificial than the randomized row we just created. Moving on, let's add some cabbages. We'll random rotate all the veggies we place, so turn those options back on to place these as well. Also, rows of veggies don't all have to be the same plant. Let's put a few cabbages at the bottom of the carrot row, for example. These were easier to place, and it looks like they're going to be good as is with no adjustment needed. Some items have more than one object available for them. These different objects are designed differently so as to add to the randomization of the look. Try and use the multiple options as needed when they are available. In the case of tomatoes, we have two different 3D objects. You can place these randomly with each other along with random rotation for an even better final look. Corn has even more options with 4 different 3D objects. Here we'll make 3 rows of corn using all 4 of the objects placed randomly and still with random rotation. This will make for as natural a look as you can get for a cornfield in Eternal Lands. As you can see, I'm placing each object on the rows we're using, but not directly in a row. Instead, I grab the next object and fill in some of the spaces, and then the next, and with the final one, I'll fill in any empty spaces left. You can place the same corn object next to each other because the random rotation will make them look different. You can also leave a random space in places, as is seen in the middle of the row closest to the map edge. Again, turn off all selections on the rotation panel when you're done with it. Of course, now we have to make sure players don't trample on our veggies, so remove the height tiling from underneath the rows of vegetables. When placing any harvestables such as flowers, you should always try and place them in a way that a player cannot step on them when possible. This will help prevent players from blocking access to the harvestable to other players. For something as small as dandelions, you can place those directly on the corner of a grid line, which will prevent walking on it completely. Our final task for this tutorial is going back into 2D mode. Now that the garden is set, the edges look off. There are 2D dirt edges, but those are more for the standard dark dirt tiles rather than the garden ground tiles. So it'll be better to use the same grass edge 2D objects that were used around the bricks. If you're following along, fix your garden decor with grass edges like was done with the bricks. To make this look better, we'll have to remove some of the veggies along the edges. Like so. Now, besides adding the 2D grass, try and figure out what I have forgotten to do that involves the vegetables. On our next tutorial, we'll look at more detailed height tiling and more detailing with 3D objects that actually need that height tiling.